Many current African American residents of Lower Richland County are descendants of Africans who were kidnapped from West Africa and transported through Charleston, South Carolina, or Virginia, arriving here in Lower Richland County. It's important to note that the history of African people did not begin with slavery in the Americas. To the contrary, African forefathers on the continent of Africa were the first humans on the planet, and their brilliance introduced science, math, architecture, and the arts to the world. In about 1740, Africans began providing free and forced labor for white plantation owners in Lower Richland County, labor that produced untold wealth for white South Carolinians and Americans.
Just imagine where my ancestor, Ellison Weston, and his sisters, Narcissa and Melissa, went from being property where Ellison was worth $400 when he was a child, or a teenager, and his sisters, who were twins, worth $250 a piece, to now, after slavery, being elected to the House of Representatives, where now he's making decisions about our education process, to really going from being listed on the same page with cows and hogs and other cattle and listed as chattel and property, to now be, shaping, our political system and our education system right here in South Carolina. It must have been so debilitating when you grow up and you're being told that you can't read, and it's illegal. You cannot read or write, and really, some people take that for granted. But here he overcame that, and really, really overcame those things, and still, and in spite of, somehow learn how to read and write. With my ancestors having been slaves and being considered as property and overcoming those type of challenges, they were able to purchase land, send their children to college, and one, his grandson ended up owning a pharmacy downtown, Regal drugstore, and became a very wealthy man. Another one, Moultrie Goodson, there's a building named after him at Benedict College for the donation that he created, and his own, grandfather was in the House of Representatives and a slave. And so things like this are why we have no reason why we can't achieve. We have, I have another ancestor, Dr. John Goodwin, who he was born 1 year after slavery was abolished in 1866, and his father was a slave. But at the same time, they made sure that even though they still had to overcome what they went through, they made sure that they had a child that they made sure got the best of what they could offer. And even though they owned a lot of land, they may have been rich in land, but maybe not so much as rich in money. But they didn't allow that to stop them from having the same opportunity to achieve, to learn, to succeed in a world that didn't want people to succeed. And there is no excuse for us today, with all of the modern technology, with all the strides that our ancestors have overcome. There's no reason why we can't succeed today.
The grit, gall, and intelligence of supposed illiterate men paved the way of a second wave of African Americans from Lower Richland to distinguish themselves in political offices.
I am Shepherd G. Wilson, but better known as George Wilson. My father's name was George Wilson. My mother's name was Janie Higgins Wilson. Well, I grew up in Kingville, South Carolina, which at this particular point is known as Gadsden. At one point, Kingville was a town in the Lower Richland area. Probably would have been second to Columbia if it were not destroyed by Sherman in the 1800s. Kingville, as I mentioned, was a town that was established in the 1840s. And General William T. Sherman, who was part of the Union Army at the time, he came through the South and he settled in Kingville. And during that period of time, as I mentioned, Kingville had hotels, motels, and the train depot. Kingville got its name from being king of the railroads, you know, that if you were living in the Lower Richland area and you needed to go any place, out of town, out of state, out of the country, you had to go through Kingsville. You would board the train in Kingsville in order to travel back and forth. But while General Sherman was in Kingville, he took over the hotel that was there. We have pictures of the hotel at this particular point, and made it a hospital for his soldiers during that period of time. And while settling in Kingville, he traveled back and forth to Columbia, Camden, where his soldiers would travel by horses or whatever and destroy whatever he needed to destroy and return back to his headquarters here in Kingville. William Sherman, of course, before leaving Kingville, he destroyed Kingville. He destroyed all of the motels, all of the railroad tracks, and everything else before leaving. So that meant that Kingville had to be rebuilt. My father also lived in Kingville, and don't remember that he has ever worked for anyone particular, such as a sharecropper and that sort of thing. I can remember the fact that he was what you call a businessman at that particular time. He ran stores, he was a farmer. He farmed and owned more than 350 acres of property right here in Kingsville, South Carolina. And at the time that he came through, of course, it was almost impossible for blacks to own that amount of property. When the house was burnt down, I was about 6, 7 years old, as I mentioned early on. And at that particular time, as young as I was, and with the other family members and the community, we never thought it was an accident, you know, at that particular point. We always thought that it was something at that time to destroy the success of what my father had gained during that period of time. We lost the house, but my father said, "I'm still here."
Come on. I grew up in Eastover in the early 40s, well, the late 40s and early 50s. Like to say, it was a very close-knit community. I grew up when everybody was your parent. If you were acting out, anybody could spank you. So that was really a great incentive for us to walk the straight and the narrow. We were taught the work ethic. You had to get up early in the mornings when I came along. You could not lay down in that bed. You had to make up your own bed, whether you're male and female. I come from a family of 10 boys and 1 girl. But boys had to scrub the floors, and back then you had to do it on your knees with a piece of cloth. And I was so happy when the mop came along, I shouted. I tell you, it was just like a great invention. But it taught us that you're not going to get anything in life that's worthwhile if you don't earn it. When I came along, the students drove the school buses. I got my license at age 14, and all of us at age 15 were driving school buses. The other thing that inspired me is to see the older people walk miles to vote. Some walked from, we call Hickory Hill. Some walked, some had wagons. But they stood in lines in the sun, in the rain, but they voted. And it was a way of teaching us that what you have in life is not going to come to you cheaply. You have to go out and get it.
William W. Dowdy migrated to Lower Richland from Georgia, and through hard work, he acquired considerable livestock and thousands of acres of property. Compared to most blacks in Lower Richland in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Dowdy family was wealthy. But the Dowdy children and grandchildren were taught that the beauty of wealth is sharing.
I like to say that when I was a little boy myself, I was exposed to my grandfather quite frequently. And I like to say that experience is one of the best teachings that you could possibly get. And back during that time, I was exposed to the best of the best. And I like to say he always instilled in me and my father and my mother that no matter what you go into, you want to be the best. And I think this have a lot to do when we look back at our family, maybe not immediate family, but relatives, and see how well they have done. That all things are possible through God when we honor Him and we put Him first. Whatever we want to do, as long as we don't forget that along the way, we need to always reach out and help others who are not as fortunate as you are.
Our parents taught us the value of life. And I would look at some of my relatives and my father and I saw how he came up, and I wanted to do better because he was an honest man. He was a hard-working man. And one thing I found out about him, the job, which he was the overseer on a farm. I looked at his salary one day, and he made $52 every 2 weeks. But making that kind of money, I never went short of anything. I had clothes, I had shelter, not the best shelter, but we survived. And I learned a lot from him. And what I really learned was I wanted to do the opposite when I became a man. And I did just that. Now, the town of Eastover, everyone got along well together, blacks and whites. We all survived. And what amazed me is that once we live off the fat of the land, our garden, our livestock, and etc. But when we would slaughter, we would share with everybody. We would, and my daddy used to have what you call a smokehouse. We would kill that pig, soak him in salt, let it cure, then we would wash the salt off, and we would hang it up in that storehouse. And that's how we survived. Little town of Eastover, I often think about it, always be close to my heart, because Eastover made me what I am today. I set a goal when I was in high school because I was the second person, another cousin of mine, got a college degree out of the House family. And I was very proud of that, but I was determined. I remember when I graduated from high school, I asked my father, told him I wanted to go to college. He said, son, I cannot afford it. So right then, I had to figure out another way to get there. So what I did, I went to the Air Force recruiter. I took that rigid exam and passed it. I was the most proudest young man out Eastover. And I made a career out of it. I stayed in there 21 and a half years. And during that time, I didn't forget about college. I went to college the same time I was getting credits. And I was able to graduate from the University of South Carolina in 1978. So I learned a lot from the town of Eastover.
But you had some very strong people in each area. Kingville, your Gadsden area, you had Mr. Tally Adams, Mr. Joel Adams. They both were deacons. You had Carnell Adams, John Adams, J.C. You had Mr. Dave Jenkins. In addition to their leadership in politics, they'd always urge you to vote. Now, if you attend a church in the community, it's very difficult to even hear some of your leaders urge you to go out and vote. The people in Gadsden, they were united. At church, one of the deacons, I remember Deacon Cleveland Lloyd, we call him Butler Lloyd. Butler every Sunday would get up and say, "Don't you all forget to vote. You need to vote. We need to have representation. And if you don't have representation, if you don't have someone sitting at the table, you have nothing." Okay? So he was right on top of it, along with his brother and JD and some more. So I was in, and the preacher was the principal at Crossroads, Reverend Butler. And he and Miss Emma would sit there, and Reverend Butler would preach a good sermon, and Miss Emma would be very supportive of him. He taught on Sunday. He taught the Bible, and he taught you everyday living. Okay, now we've got a group of guys now that they want to stay in the Bible, and they don't tell you how to earn a living. Some of the people that we attend church with can't even read. Teach them how to do that. Take the time to do that. We had some giants up in Hopkins. One of the members of this church, his name was Deacon Cohen. And we started talking. He could sing. Deacon David Cohen was his name. And he said, and I would get to run my mouth sometime, and he said, "Boy, what you know about politics won't even fill up a teaspoon." So he, David Cohen, I found to be profoundly equipped to have come through that era and brought us this far. Deacon Cohen, Deacon Ernest White over in Leixland, Deacon Alexander McRant. Deacon McRant would stand up in a courtroom, and that booming voice, you knew he was there, and he was prepared, and he was not afraid.
I need to tell you about our elementary school, Stony Hill Elementary School, that housed first grade through third grade. That was the elementary school. The middle school housed fourth and fifth graders. After leaving Stony Hill, we had to go to Weber to pursue our education. We had a car. We had to walk 5 miles from Kingville to Weber. By having a car in the family, my mother would take us to school sometimes. And there was a sawmill at Kingville. And Mr. Fred Dowdy had a son that drove that truck. And he would give us a ride on his truck to Weber Elementary School, where the boys had to gather leaves and pine cones to make a fire to keep us warm. Then I left Weber and went to Booker T. Washington, and it wasn't all about just going to school for fun. You had to learn the basics, and we did that. My mother and father did not have a formal education. but they instilled in their children to get an education and do everything that they could to progress as they got older in the world. They did not want us to be under any slave mentality. They wanted us to be secured in our own way. That is, to support ourselves. And when we got families, we would be able to support them and instill in them the importance of education also. Became a teacher in the early 60s. My first job was at Williston High School. I closed out a 12th grade class there at that school. Then returning back to my home, I was hired at Ellery Elementary School, where I taught first grade for 26 years. I retired from Ellery in 1992. Coming back home to Weber, I worked for 4 years as a critical needs teacher.
Lord, do it. Lord, do it. Please do it.
Historian and author Reverend John A. Middleton, historian and community activist Deborah Scott Brooks, and Marie B. Adams, chairperson of the board of directors of Southeast Rural Community Outreach, are spearheading efforts to preserve and present the priceless history of Lower Richland. Lower Richland County is a scenic paradise with the breathtaking splendor of the Congaree National Park, its stately homes, and lush pasture lands. But the most precious and most beautiful jewel of Lower Richland is its people.
Do it for me. I know you're able, Jesus. Lord, come on and do it. Oh, yeah. I need you to do it for me. Do it right now. Right now. Listen. If you've read your Bible, then you know the story about the man who could not see. Hallelujah. But he heard that Jesus was passing by. He said, Lord, please lay your hands on me. And I went back and said, Lord,